Okay, so I think we should start in any case. More or less time, doesn't matter. Yeah. Okay, so how do I do this now? I minimize this, I believe. You can see my screen now. 86.
Yes.
83. Okay, so I want to, there's still something this I have to do first. So I was doing this business, okay, this business of Montel's family, Montel's theorem, what is a normal family and things like that. And there were, so let me just repeat myself, you'll understand that, you know, this is not particularly difficult. The point is that the distance between a compact set and a closed set is strictly greater than 0, okay, if they are disjoint. If A and B, A is compact and B is closed and A intersection B is empty, then the distance, the infimum of everything is strictly greater than 0. I mean, and therefore, if you have K open, a compact set is contained in a open set, okay? If K and B, K is compact, B is closed, and K is contained in B complement, then B complement is open. So the same statement is that if you have a compact set contained in a closed set, if you have a compact set contained in an open set, then the distance of K to the complement is strictly positive, okay? And using this idea and Cauchy's theorem, basically, we have got that, you know, Cauchy's integral formula, the distance between Fz and Fw, Fz is Cauchy's integral formula, is less than or equal to B times Z minus W, where B is a bound of F on gamma, okay? This was for a fixed F, but therefore if you allow F to vary over a family, and that family should be uniformly bounded on compact sets, okay, then this inequality, so this depends on the bound of F. So if F lies in a family which I call script F, and script F is a family which is uniformly bounded on compact sets, in particular, it's uniformly bounded on these gammas that I have here, and therefore this will be true, the B will be independent of the F that you choose. And therefore you will get that given an epsilon greater than 0, there exists a delta greater than 0 such that Z minus W is less than delta, implies Fz minus Fw is less than epsilon. Okay, so
use your mouse to point, Baba.
Yeah. Okay, so Fz minus Fw is less than this, and therefore if Z minus W is less than something, then Fz minus Fw is also less than something. And now I'm going to allow the functions little f to vary in a family of functions which I call big F. So omega is a domain. A family of holomorphic functions is uniformly bounded on compact subsets if for each k and for all k and for all k, for all f, Fz is less than or equal to B. The B depends on k, okay? So there exists a constant B such that every function f is uniformly bounded on any compact set k. For all a and k, for all f and f, mod Fz is less than or equal to B. It is equicontinuous on a compact subset. For all epsilon, there exists delta such that this, so this is for one function. So this must be true. I must have said that for all. I said something that this must be true for all f and f. Okay, equicontinuous means uniformly uniformly in the family. So the previous result we have says that if f is a family of holomorphic functions that is uniformly bounded on compact subsets, then f is equicontinuous on every compact subset. Just a moment, sorry for this. Virendra mein antar bolin, ek taasan antar phone kare. Okay, tada. F is equicontinuous on every compact. That is what we have just stated in that previous statement on the previous page. Okay, this is why I'm saying that if the bound is uniform on a compact subset, uniformly bounded on compact subsets, then that inequality you will get will be true for all elements in that family. Okay. So the next statement was that there exists an exhaustion, this thing I'd called an exhaustion of an open set by compact sets Kn, where each Kn is compact and Kn is contained in the interior of Kn plus 1. So in particular, all these have non-empty interiors. Okay. And this again, I had not really done this whole thing, but I told you, you see, what you want to do is you want to go closer and closer to the complement of omega. Okay. So therefore, you say that you take all those points and Kns must be compact. So it must be closed and bounded. Okay. So you have some Kn is bounded by the B0 n bar. Therefore, this is an increasing thing, closure of the ball, center 0, radius n. And I want to say that Kns also includes points that are getting closer and closer to the origin. So you see Kn has distance 1 over n from the complement. Kn plus 1 has distance greater than or equal to 1 over n plus 1. So obviously Kn is contained in Kn plus 1. But the point is that Kn is contained in interior of Kn plus 1. So this is something that was an exercise. Again, there's some picture that you can draw to understand what this exercise is. So I hope you understand, I hope you realize what this picture means. Dn, this is business here. This business here is that the distance is greater than 1 over n. This distance is 1 over n between omega. This is omega. This line is omega. Outside that is omega complement. And we are saying that every point here is at a distance greater than 1 by n from the boundary. And I have to make it bounded. So I take this thing. So this is a closed set and it's a bounded set and therefore it's compact. And you have to check that Kn is contained in interior of Kn plus 1. So again, this is some kind of a triangle inequality that you have to get. Okay, so this is called an exhaustion. Omega is a domain, F is a normal family if every sequence of functions has a subsequence which converges uniformly on every compact subset of omega. Okay, and the statement is holomorphic if you have a family of holomorphic functions that is uniformly bounded on compact subsets of omega. Okay, then F is a normal family. And this is basically a diagonalization argument. So I think I'd stopped here last time. Okay. So what we have is that this set is separable. Omega is a separable thing. So you take a countable dense set in omega. Okay. Let Fn be a sequence of functions in F. Okay. Family of holomorphic functions that are uniformly bounded on compact subsets of omega. So I should say let Fn be a sequence of functions in F. F is what? A family of holomorphic functions that are uniformly bounded on compact subsets of omega. I should minimize this. I hope it's not gone somewhere. Where is it gone? I think Alt and Tab will work. I have some problem now. Anyway, we'll continue. You can still see my screen now. My screen still has a red line. Can you see it? One of you, just answer.
So we can see your screen, but we do not see any red line.
Yes, sir.
You don't see the red line around it? I can see, but you can see the screen now. As soon as you can see the screen, that's enough.
Yes, we can see the screen.
If you cannot see the screen at any time, please stop me. Okay, I mean, please tell me that. And if you can't tell it to me on this, you please call me up and tell me that you can't hear me. There's this hilarious story of one of these online lectures that were going on, okay, online seminar or whatever, conference seminar that was going on. And there's this hilarious lecture about how this person was lecturing, okay? He was presenting whatever he was talking about in that online seminar. And he was so engrossed in what he was doing that he had switched off his mobile phone and he had switched off all other forms of communication. And this fellow was going on and on lecturing for the full hour. At the end of the hour, he turned on his phone and his email and whatever it was, and he saw these, 15 messages from people who were supposed to be listening to him, saying that, oh, we can't hear you, you have got disconnected, there's some problem, you can't hear you. So this person was lecturing, going merrily ahead lecturing, while none of the audience could hear what he was saying. And it was going on because he didn't keep, he was so conscientious that he didn't keep his mobile on next to him. So anyway, that's why my mobile is on next to me. So if any of you, if at any time this transmission goes, you please call me up and tell me. It's quite funny. Anyway. So what is it? You take a separable, omega is separable, you take a countable dense set, you take a sequence of functions in F, which are uniformly bounded on compact sets, okay? Take some compact subset, fix a compact subset, okay? We have to show that it is a normal family. What is the meaning of a normal family? Every sequence of functions has a subsequence which converges uniformly on every compact subset of omega, okay? The limit function need not be in F. And I hope you have tried to write down what the epsilon delta definition of this is. For all epsilon, there exists delta, for all F, whatever. So it will be very instructive for you to write down epsilon delta for all there exists statement which says this. And again, let me assure you that most of you, most of the time, will get this statement wrong. I think I'd said this earlier, but worthwhile saying this again, okay? And once you get it wrong, you will be convinced that you do have a phobia of quantifiers. So please at least realize that you have a phobia of quantifiers. Okay, so I want to show that it converges uniformly on every compact subset. Okay, so first I'll do it, fix a compact subset. Okay, Fn is uniformly bounded. So Fn of W1 is a bounded sequence. Every bounded sequence has a convergent subsequence. So you can find a Fn1 is a subsequence of Fn such that Fn1 omega 1 converges. Fn1 of W2 is a bounded sequence. So you can find a subsequence such that Fn2 is a subsequence of Fn1 such that Fn2 of omega W2 converges. Remember, that also means that Fn2 of W1 converges. Therefore, you can find a subsequence FNR of FNR minus 1 such that FNR of WR converges. And therefore, for all the previous ones, FNR of WJ converges for J less than or equal to R. Then you do the obvious thing that you've done so many times. You take the diagonal subsequence. Okay, let Gn be Fnn. Then Gn of Wj converges for each j equal to 1 to infinity. Okay, and what we know is that, see, what was part A of Montel's theorem? Okay, so what is the conditions that I have here? Family of holomorphic functions that are uniformly bounded on compact subsets of omega. Okay, and what was the previous Montel's theorem? So let me remind you of that. If a family of holomorphic functions are uniformly bounded on compact subsets of omega, then F is equicontinuous on every compact subset of omega. Okay, so how to use this fact that F is equicontinuous on every compact subset of omega? So F is equicontinuous on every compact subset of omega, and the claim is that Gn converges uniformly on K. F is equicontinuous, so for all epsilon on every compact subset of omega. So K is a compact subset of omega, so F is equicontinuous on K. Therefore, for all epsilon greater than 0, there exists a delta greater than 0, such that for all Z, W, and K, and for all F and F, This was a place where I said this business about Yoda and whatever, or maybe I said it earlier. For all Z, W in K, for all F in F, mod Z minus W less than delta implies Fz minus Fw is less than epsilon. And it's good, as I said last time, not to write for all F and F at the end, but to write it in the beginning. There's one more reason why that F in F, little f in script F, should not be written at the end. If you don't write it before you introduce this Fz minus Fw, and you're reading this, and I've not written for all F and F in the beginning, then when you come to this stage, the question you should ask when you come to this stage, you see, the question you should ask is, what is F? What is little f? Because I've not referred to little f anywhere earlier. And suddenly I'm referring to a little f. So the question that you should ask at this stage is, what is the little f? Okay. So there are two reasons, in fact, this Yoda's business is going on. Anyway, so for all Z, W in K, for all F in F, Z minus W less than delta implies Fz minus Fw is less than epsilon. Wj is dense. Okay. Now I have these deltas. Okay. So you cover your, the point is that you can cover, if you have a dense set, okay, and you cover this thing by open balls of a fixed radius, okay, then you have to get the whole space. The closure of W is the whole of omega. Closure of the set of Wj's is the whole of omega. Because given any x in omega, there exists a W whose distance from x is less than delta. So by denseness, this infinite union contains delta, which contains k. Okay. Therefore, this BWJ delta is an open cover of k. Okay. So I made a mistake here. I shouldn't say as k is dense. I should say as k is compact. There's a mistake here. Okay. On page 80. I shouldn't say k is dense. I should say as k is compact. And I have an open cover of k. Therefore, there exists a finite subcover, j equal to 1 to n naught of b, ball, center, wj, and radius delta. This is a finite subcover of k. Okay. Now I pick a number n0 so large. So now I have these special wj's. Which wj's? Wj's going from 1, for j going from 1 to n naught. These are finite number of wj's. Okay. So pick n naught so large that gm of wj minus gn of wj. Okay, because gm's of wj's are convergent. Okay, I'm only fixing finitely many wj's. So for those finitely many wj's, I can find a nm which are sufficiently large, that means greater than some n naught tilde, such that gm of wj minus gn of wj is less than epsilon for all nm greater than equal to n naught tilde. For all j, so this is for all nm greater than equal to this very large number, and this is true for all j's which go from 1 to n naught. N naught is some fixed number. If z is in a compact, if z is in the compact set, z belongs to one of these wj's for some j less than n naught, and gnz minus gmz, okay, is less than gnz minus. So you add and subtract. This is your 3 epsilon business. Okay, so this is less than 3 epsilon. And what am I saying? For n and m greater than equal to n naught tilde, n and m greater than n naught tilde, gnz minus gmz is less than 3 epsilon. Okay, for all z in k. And therefore gn converges uniformly on k. Okay. So the point is that are we through at this stage? And you must understand that we are not. Because what do I want to show? I want to show that it converges uniformly for every compact subset. What I have done is that it converges uniformly for this one compact subset of K, one compact subset of omega. What I want is that it converges uniformly for every compact subset of omega. Okay, and this is where we need this exhaustion. Okay, so we are not through. The subsequence has to converge uniformly on every compact subset. We have shown that it converges uniformly on this fixed one compact subset K. I want to show it for every K. Okay, so you take any, let Kn be any exhaustion of omega. That means each Kn is compact, Kn is contained in interior Kn plus 1 and union Kn is omega. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that the interiors of Kn plus 1 form an open cover of omega. Any compact subset contained in omega has interiors of Kns as an open cover. Therefore, some finite, it has that open cover interiors of Kns has a finite subcover. But interior Kns are increasing. That means one of those Kns is going to contain the compact set K. If K is any compact subset, K is contained in Kn naught for some n naught. Okay. So we now take Gn1 be a subsequence of Fn that converges uniformly on K1. So now we have these fixed compact subsets K1, K2, K3, and so on. So let Gn1. So K1 is a compact subset. It's a fixed compact subset. So what I have is that I'm given this family F. Then I can find a subsequence which converges uniformly on K1. Then I can find a subsequence of that first subsequence which converges uniformly on K2. And therefore it will converge uniformly on K1. Then I find a subsequence of that subsequence of that subsequence, Gn2. When I'm writing these dots, I hope you understand that I'm too lazy to write all this down. Let Gn1 be a subsequence of F1 that converges uniformly on the compact set K1. Let Gn2 be a subsequence of Gn1 that converges uniformly on the compact set K2. Remember, K1 is contained in interior of K2. Let Gnr be a subsequence of Gnr minus 1 that converges uniformly on Kr, and therefore it will converge uniformly on all the previous K1, K2 up to Kr minus 1. And then you take this subsequence, the diagonal subsequence will be a subsequence of Fn that converges uniformly for every KL. Okay, and therefore Gn converges uniformly on every compact subset of omega. So we are using this diagonalization argument not once, but twice. Okay, so this diagonalization business is twice, and that's where you need this exhaustion, okay, of Kn. Okay. Notice in this second part, nowhere am I using anything to do with holomorphicity. Okay. So the second part of Montel's theorem is actually the same as the Ascoli-Arzela theorem business. And there is no need for these functions to be holomorphic. Holomorphicity was needed earlier in the first part of Montel's theorem because I was going to use Cauchy's integral formula. So these two parts, you must understand that they are playing a slightly different role. The holomorphicity is used only in that first part. Now we need one more piece, okay, which says that if you have a family of holomorphic injective functions on a connected domain. So omega is connected and open. We need openness also. And Fn is a sequence of holomorphic functions on omega that are injective and which converge uniformly in every compact subset of omega to a holomorphic function f. So you have a sequence of holomorphic injective functions that converge uniformly on every compact subset to some holomorphic function f. The f, you see, if it converges uniformly on every compact subset, the f must be holomorphic. Okay. The statement is that if the fn's are all injective, then the limit is either injective or it is as far away as it can be from injective, namely that it is constant. Okay, the limit of a family of injective holomorphic functions which converge uniformly on every compact subset is either injective or it is constant. I hope you understand that this is sort of very extreme behavior. Okay, and how far away can you get from an injective map? The furthest away you can get from an injective map is to have a constant map. So this is actually a very extreme behavior of holomorphic functions. The limit of a sequence of injective, I'm talking only about holomorphic functions. The limit of a sequence of injective functions is either injective or it is a constant. And just think about it, it's quite amazing. This is one of those really weird properties about complex holomorphic functions. There are many such things. Proof is quite easy. We are using the argument principle. Suppose f is not injective, we want to get a contradiction. So if it's not injective, there exists Z1, Z2, Z1 not equal to Z2. I've not written that, very bad. There exists Z1 not equal to Z2 in omega FZ1 is equal to FZ2. What do? You take Gn to be Fnz minus Fnz1. Okay, so clearly Gn of Z1 is 0. Gn has no other zeros in omega. Why? Because f is each of the fn's are injective. Okay, so Z1 is a 0 of Gn, and there are no other zeros because fn's are injective. Gz1 equal to Gz2 implies Fn Z1 is equal to Fn Z2. Okay, and therefore Z2 must be Z1, whatever. So Gn has no other zeros in omega, and what are we given? We are given that Gn, because Fn converges uniformly to F, Gn converges uniformly on compact subsets of omega to G of Z, which is Fz minus Fz1. Fnz1 converges to Fz1, Fnz converges to Fz. So Gn converges uniformly on compact subsets of omega to Fz minus Fz1. If G is not identically 0, okay, remember Fz1 is equal to Fz2, okay. If G is not identically 0, then Z2 is also a 0 of Gz. Z1 is also a 0 of Gz. But G is not identically 0, then Z2 is an isolated 0. Okay. Yeah, because if you have a 0 which is a limit point of zeros, then the function must be identically 0. We have done this some time ago. So if G of Z is not identically 0, Z2 is an isolated 0 of Gz, so there exists a neighborhood of Z2 on which G has only 0 as Z2, has only Z2 as a 0 inside that ball. Okay. And therefore, by this argument principle or whatever, integral over CZ2 delta, G prime Z over GZ, what does this do? It counts the zeros because we have an analytic function. G prime Z over GZ is 1 because it has only one zero. Now, GNZ, okay, has no zeros on that center inside that ball. And therefore, 1 over GNZ converges to 1 over GZ uniformly inside that thing. And Gn prime Z converges uniformly to GZ. Yeah. So this is another thing that needs a little bit of justification, that if Gn converges uniformly to G and Gn has no zeros and G has no zeros there, okay, then 1 over Gn converges to 1 over G uniformly and Gn prime converges to G prime. Okay, why? Because you have this formula for Gn prime. Gn prime of Z is equal to that Cauchy integral formula for the derivative. Okay, and therefore Gn prime converges on that compact set circle Z2 delta. So Gn prime over Gz converges to G prime over Gz, and therefore this Gn prime divided by Gn over that circle converges to G prime over G. Okay, but each Gn is 1, 1. There's no other zero. Okay, Gn prime has no other zero. It has no zero because Gn prime has, where have I said that? Gn has a zero only at Z1. Okay, so here there are no zeros inside this because of the ball center Z2, which is far away from Z1. Okay, where do I have that? Z2 is far away from Z1. Yeah, because this ball has no zeros. Correct what I'm saying. So this left-hand side is 0, whereas the right-hand side is 1. And therefore 0 cannot tend to 1, and therefore this is a contradiction. So the uniform limit on compact sets of injective functions, holomorphic functions, okay, it's understood that they're holomorphic. So the uniform limit on compact sets of injective functions is either injective or it is a constant. Okay, that is what this says. There's one more thing I need now. One more piece that I need. If you have a proper subset of C, which is simply connected, okay, then omega is a proper subset of C that is simply connected. Then omega is biholomorphically equivalent to an open subset of the unit disk that contains the origin. Okay, so the only, quote unquote, only, what do I mean by only? By only, I mean something that is equal up to a biholomorphic map. Biholomorphic means what? Biholomorphic means it must be bijective, and the map itself is holomorphic, and the inverse is holomorphic. Okay. That is a consequence of the open mapping theorem also, but anyway. So a proper subset of C which is simply connected is biholomorphically equivalent to an open subset of the unit disk which contains the origin. Okay. Why? We have seen all this proof earlier. We have seen this earlier. All the ingredients we already have. Omega is not equal to C. Okay, so you choose a point which is not in omega. Call that point alpha. So alpha is a complex number which is not in omega. Hz equal to Z minus alpha. Okay. This is a holomorphic function on omega. This function never vanishes on omega because alpha is not in omega. So H is a holomorphic function that never vanishes on the simply connected domain omega. If you have a holomorphic function that never vanishes on a simply connected domain, then you can define the log. Fz equal to log hz, which is log z minus alpha, exists and is well defined. And e to the fz is z minus alpha. Okay. Note that f is 1 to 1 because fz1 equal to fz2 means e to the fz1 is equal to e to the fz2. That means z1 minus alpha is equal to z2 minus alpha. That means that z1 is equal to z2. So f is 1 to 1. Now you fix any point omega, sorry, you fix any point w in omega. So in this picture, I'm fixing a point w in omega. Okay, this is fixed. Then you look at fz and fw. My claim is that not only can't, my claim is that fz cannot be equal to fz plus 2 pi I, okay, for any z. So w is fixed, z is a variable. I'm saying that fz cannot be equal to fw plus 2 pi I. So I should have written, I shouldn't have called it w, I should call it w naught to tell you that it is a fixed number. So let w naught be fixed. Okay. So my claim is that fz is not equal to fw naught plus 2 pi I for any z in omega. So again, I should say for all z in omega, fz is not equal to fw naught plus 2 pi I. So I'm making the same mistake that I'm telling you not to do. For all z in omega, fz is not equal to fz plus 2 pi I. Why? Fz is not equal to fw naught plus 2 pi I. Why? If fz is equal to fw naught plus 2 pi I, you take exponential of that. That means e to the fz is equal to e to the fw. But e to the fz is z minus alpha. E to the fw is w minus alpha. And therefore you have z minus alpha equal to w minus alpha implies z is equal to w. But if z is equal to w, then fz cannot equal to fz plus 2 pi I. Okay, so fz is not equal to fw naught plus 2 pi I for all z in omega. But you see, I don't just want that fz is not equal to fw naught plus 2 pi I. I want to say that for all z in omega. I want to say that fz is actually far away from fw naught plus 2 pi I. What do I mean by far away from? I mean that if you take all the z's in omega, fz, the distance between fz and fw naught plus 2 pi I is at least some number, 0.00001. It's at least some delta which is greater than 0. Okay. So so what this is saying is that the image of f omega is far away from fw plus 2 pi I. That means if you take any point in f omega, okay, you can find a, sorry, let me say this again. There exists a delta greater than 0 such that no point of f omega lies in, no point of f omega is close to, is delta close to fw naught plus 2 pi I. That means you can, every point in f omega is far away from, at least at a distance delta, from fw plus 2 pi I. Why? Suppose this is not true. Okay, that means that there are points in the image which are arbitrarily close to fw0 plus 2 pi I. That means that there exists a sequence of points in omega such that f of that sequence gets closer and closer to f omega fw plus 2 pi I. Okay, so fz, there exists a sequence of points zn such that fzn converges to fw plus 2 pi I. This sequence is in omega and is getting, the images of that sequence is getting closer and closer, arbitrarily close to this particular number. So if Zn converges, fZn converges to fw0 plus 2 pi I, then e to the fZn must converge to e to the fw. That means Zn minus alpha must converge to w minus alpha. That means Zn must converge to w. But if Zn is converging to w, both these are elements in omega. F is holomorphic, so F is continuous. So if Zn converges to w, fZn must converge to fw. Okay, but fZn, where does Zn converge to? Okay, so here there is something that one should understand. Zn converges to w, fZn must converge to fw. Okay, but then what will you get? Where is the contradiction there? But fZn, okay, what does this mean? fZn, why is this a contradiction? That if Zn converges to w, then fZn will converge to fw. Okay, but what did we have? I have told you that. What have I told you? There exists a Zn in omega such that fZn converges to fw plus 2 pi I. But I'm just telling you that fZn converges to fw. Therefore, fw must be equal to f2 pi I. That means 2 pi I is equal to 0. That is a contradiction. Okay. So, therefore, my assumption is wrong. So there exists a delta greater than 0 such that every point in f omega is at least at a distance delta from fw plus 2 pi I, w0 plus 2 pi I. So that means fz minus fw0 plus 2 pi I in absolute value is greater than delta. That means 1 over fz minus fw plus w0 plus 2 pi I is less than 1 over delta in absolute value. Okay, that means the image of this function fz, capital F of z, the image is bounded. Okay, so capital F of z has bounded image. Therefore, it is contained in some ball. Okay, center something. Okay, and is such that f is 1 to 1, capital F is 1 to 1, as f is 1 to 1, f is holomorphic, yeah, because that 1 over the denominator is holomorphic, 1 over the denominator is holomorphic if the denominator is never 0. It is holomorphic and bounded, and it is an open map. Every holomorphic map is open. Okay. So if it is holomorphic and bounded and open, then capital F from omega to f omega is biholomorphic. I don't know if I've done this. We have shown that it is an open map. Okay. And therefore, we know that it is the inverse is continuous. But the point is that the inverse is holomorphic. I don't think I've said that yet. So somewhere I should say that if you have on 2 map, the fact that 1-1 onto map, which is holomorphic in one direction, then it is also holomorphic in the reverse direction. What we know is that it is continuous in the reverse direction. What you have to show is that it is holomorphic in the reverse direction. Okay. So, okay, this is something I don't think I've said this. I should have said this earlier. Anyway. So, what time is it? It's still 15 minutes. So you have it's bounded and open. Okay, and therefore it has an interior point, and therefore you can scale it. So that 0, first of all, you can translate it so that 0 is an interior point, and then you can scale it so that it is contained in the unit ball. Okay, if you have something that is bounded, that has everything is bounded in a big ball of size, say 23, then you divide it by 24. 1/24 times that function will be contained in a ball of size less than 1. And the interior will also be contained in that. And you take a point on the interior. A scaling and a translation of f will give a biholomorphic map f tilde from omega to b, okay, which is an open subset of the unit disk and which contains the origin 0. Okay, 0 is in the interior. So the point here is that if you have a proper subset which is simply connected, then you can find a biholomorphic map which maps it into an open subset of the disk that contains the origin. Okay. And the idea, as you can see, is very, very nice actually. Okay. All that you have to do is consider the log. How did we do this? All that we had to do is take a log. Why can we take the log? I can take the log of h of z because h never vanishes and the domain is simply connected. Okay. Therefore, the log exists. You do some scaling and translation. There's only this business of. So finally, we come to the proof of the Riemann mapping theorem. I need one more ingredient. I'll tell you that as we go along. So if omega contained in C is proper and simply connected, and we assume that the domain is always open because we want to talk about differentiability. Okay. Omega not equal to C, omega is open and omega is simply connected. Let Z0 in omega. Okay, then there exists a unique biholomorphic map f from omega to d such that f of Z0 is 0 and the derivative of f of Z0, derivative at Z0, okay, is a real number and that real number is greater than 0. This, what does this say? This says that every proper simply connected subset is actually only the disk. There's only one proper simply connected subset. Okay. Because everything else is a biholomorphic map from D to whatever omega you're thinking about. This is very powerful, and I hope you understand that this actually is quite amazing. That the disk is the only simply connected, okay, subset of C up to biholomorphic things for when you have the image is not the whole of C. Okay, I mean the up to when omega is simply connected and not the whole of the complex plane. Now in this there is, okay, and the uniqueness is very easy to understand. Okay. How much time do I have? 20. I'm getting closer and closer to my limit. If G is another such map, then F composed with G inverse We'll go from D to D. H is going to map 0 to 0. That means H is a biholomorphism. So it's an automorphism of the disk which fixes the origin. The only automorph, we know all the automorphisms of the disk. And the only automorphisms of the disk which fix the origin are the rotations. Okay, so H of Z must be like this. Now, H prime of 0 is greater than 0. What are the conditions that I put on F? The conditions I put on F is that F prime of Z0 is greater than 0. And you should be able to show that that implies that H prime of 0 is greater than 0. And therefore, theta must be 0. And therefore, H of Z is equal to Z. That means F is equal to G. Okay, so uniqueness is very easy to see. This is just following from the uniqueness follows from the fact that we know what all the automorphisms, holomorphic automorphisms of the disk are. Okay. And the next statement you should understand is that the conditions on omega are necessary. Okay. Because if you have F from omega to D and omega is the whole of C, that means F is a holomorphic map from C to D. That means F is an entire map from C to D. That means F is a bounded entire function on C. But bounded entire map on C must be constant. Okay, so omega cannot be equal to C. Okay, then you must have that omega is simply connected. Why? Because D is simply connected. Okay, D is simply connected. And if you take any two maps, any two paths in omega, the images of those paths are paths in D. And therefore, there exists a homotopy between these two paths, which I will call H. And therefore, I go back by F inverse, and I'll get a homotopy between the two paths, gamma 1 and gamma 2. D is simply connected. Gamma 1 and gamma 2 are two paths in omega with the same initial and end points, and F gamma 1 and F gamma 2, okay, are paths in D with the same initial and end points, and therefore F gamma 1 and F gamma 2 are path homotopic in D. So suppose the path homotopy is given by H. Let H be the path homotopy in D, then F inverse H will be the path homotopy in omega. Therefore, these conditions are obvious. Okay, and what you want to show is that under these conditions, you want to prove that there exists a biholomorphic function F. So, I don't want to start this now. I shouldn't start this now. There's not enough time. So the proof, once you have come to this stage, is going to be, let me tell you what the idea is. Okay. So first of all, your omega, which is simply connected and not the whole of C, what we have shown earlier is that we can think of omega as a subset of D. Okay. So we can assume, without loss of generality, we can assume that omega is an open subset of the unit disk and 0 lies in omega. Okay. So without loss of generality, we can assume that omega is an open subset of the unit disk, 0 is in omega, and therefore we have the inclusion map or the identity map from omega to D, because omega is a subset of D. Identity of Z is equal to Z. The identity map is injective, that is 1, 1. Identity map 0 to 0, and identity of Z, its derivative at 0. D by dz of Z is 1. So identity prime at 0 is 1, which is greater than 0. So what is the idea of the proof? And it's a very beautiful idea. I hope you will see this. The idea is we want to find an f, okay, which sort of will take omega to d. Omega is a subset of d and 0 is mapped to 0. Okay, 0 is in omega. So what is the idea? You take all holomorphic functions which are injective, which map 0 to 0. Okay? And somehow we want to find a maximum element in this. But first of all holomorphic functions, all holomorphic injective functions which map 0 to 0, if I do this, I must first be sure that this set is non-empty. Why is it non-empty? I've just told you that because omega is a subset of D, the identity is injective, it maps 0 to 0, and the derivative, it's holomorphic, injective, and maps 0 to 0. Okay? So this family F is non-empty. Okay? Among this family, I want to choose that function which is going to be that unique function I'm talking about. Okay? And it somehow must fill up the whole of D. We have one function, namely the identity. It fills up some part of D, namely it fills up omega. But I don't want to just fill up omega. I want to fill up the all of D. So I must somehow get that the function is growing fast. But I only know something about 0. So what is the idea? I want a function that is growing fast at 0. So which function should I be looking out for? I want a function that's growing fast at 0. Growing fast at 0 means what? The derivative at 0 must be large. And I want a function which is growing as fast as it possibly can at 0 among the functions I'm considering. Okay? So I want a function which is in the family F, holomorphic injective F0 equal to 0, which is growing as fast as it possibly can at the point 0. And I hope that if it grows very fast at 0, it will fill up the whole of D. If my speed at 0 is very high, then hopefully I will go very far. Yes. Therefore, which is the function that I should choose? I should choose the function with the largest, with the highest speed at 0. Does that make sense? So now how do I get back to, click on this, I click on this. I got back. Do you understand what I'm saying? That what I want is a function which is growing, which has the highest speed or highest velocity at z equal to 0. Yes? And therefore, if I have, I mean, it's a very natural idea. Okay, you're somewhere, if you give the ball that you have in front of you, if you give that ball that you have in front of you the strongest kick, that means you're giving it the largest initial velocity, you expect the ball to go the furthest. Does it make sense? And the idea is what is very nice in this. The ball, you have a ball in front of you and you're going to give it a very large initial velocity. You're going to give it as big a kick as you can because you want the ball to go as far as you can possibly go. Yes? So what is the function that you will choose? You will choose the function whose derivative at 0 is the maximum. You don't know if a maximum exists, so you want a sequence of functions whose derivative at 0 is going to converge to that largest possible thing. Why is the largest possible thing a finite number? How do you know that the largest possible velocity at 0 is not infinite? So that will have something to do with Schwartz lemma, maximum modulus theorem, and things like that, which all of this we'll do next time. Okay. So idea is very easy. Idea is very natural. You look at this family of functions and look at that function which has the largest initial velocity. You're in a football field and you're at the center there and you want to go as far as you can. So what do? You give it the highest possible kick. And highest possible kick is finite because everything is finite. Okay. So please read this, what I'm talking about, and try to understand what I'm saying. Okay. And we'll continue this tomorrow. Questions?